If you're lonely, you could probably learn a thing or two from Dexter Morgan. I know. That sounds ridiculous at first. After all, Dexter spends most of his life convinced he's fundamentally different from everyone around him. Harry practically raises him to believe that meaningful human connection is something other people get to have, but not him. From the time he's a child, he's taught to see himself as separate, different, broken in some way. Harry teaches Dexter how to manage his urges, but he also teaches him that he'll never truly fit in because of them. That no matter how convincing his mask becomes, he'll always be standing outside of normal human relationships looking in. But the thing is that Dexter spends his entire life disproving Harry's theory. Not intentionally either. In fact, if you ask Dexter himself, especially in the earlier seasons, he'd probably insist Harry was right. He constantly describes himself as an outsider with no feelings. He narrates his life as if he's studying human behavior instead of participating in it. He talks about himself like someone who can imitate relationships but never truly experience them. But if you stop listening to what Dexter says and start paying attention to what he actually does, a completely different story emerges. Because despite believing he's incapable of connection, Dexter is constantly forming connections. He makes friends. He falls in love. He becomes a father. He develops relationships with mentors, coworkers, confidants, and people he genuinely cares about. More importantly, every time he allows someone into his life, he becomes a better version of himself. So if you're feeling lonely, consider taking a few pages out of Dexter's playbook. First, understand that one of the main reasons people stay lonely is that they stop participating in life around them. They convince themselves that because connection doesn't happen naturally, it isn't meant to happen at all. They withdraw and wait. They tell themselves they'll start making friends when they're more confident, more interesting, more successful, or less awkward. Dexter never really does that. Social interaction rarely comes naturally to him. Most of the time he's uncomfortable. Half the time he's mentally calculating what a normal response is supposed to look like, yet he keeps engaging with people anyway. Chalk it up to Harry's training, I guess. Either way, Dexter puts himself out there time and time again. Miguel Prado doesn't become part of Dexter's life because friendship magically lands in his lap. Dexter chooses to spend time with him. Even when he was a bit reluctant, he opened the door. He allowed the friendship to develop. Miguel wanted to be in Dexter's world, sure, but it was Dexter's decision to be open-minded and embrace the idea of friendship that made it happen. The same thing happens with Brother Sam and Dr. Vogel. The same thing happens with countless people throughout his life. He didn't have a lot in common with Brother Sam, but they found something to connect over anyway, and in a short time, they both really came to care for each other. And in the case of Dr. Vogel, she created a whole list of problems for Dexter when she first showed up in Miami, but before it was all said and done, Dexter's decision to get involved with her saved his relationship with Deb and helped him take down the brain surgeon, albeit a bit too late. Even after years of betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment, Dexter is still trying to form new connections. He makes an effort to connect with Mia LaPierre despite her connection to Leon Prater's group, and despite every reason he could have to remain distant. Mia isn't easy to win over, but Dexter's approach got him 2 dates with her before she was hauled off to jail. Again, Dexter doesn't have the best social skills and he had reasons to stray from all of these people, but he didn't let any of that stuff stop him. That's an important detail because lonely people often imagine that socially successful people never feel awkward. Dexter is proof that isn't true. He often feels awkward and out of place. Most of the time, he doesn't even really know exactly what he's doing. The difference is that he does it anyway. He doesn't wait to be comfortable before he leans in and exists with the world. He engages with the world first and gradually becomes more comfortable as he does so. You can see this growth in surprisingly small moments. Earlier versions of Dexter would have hated something as simple as dancing. At his school reunion, he gets out on the dance floor to blend in. He was clucky and stiff while he danced, but everyone around him was still having a great time. Now, the idea of voluntarily putting himself into a socially vulnerable situation like that should be miserable for him. Yet by the time we get to New Blood, he's dancing happily with Angela in the middle of Iron Lake's small tavern. This time, his body was more relaxed and he was much happier to be busting a move. That's not because his personality suddenly changed overnight, it's because years of participating in life slowly expanded what he was comfortable with. The Dexter who dances with Angela exists because he repeatedly chose socializing instead of self-isolating. Time and time again, Dexter, someone who should be one of the loneliest people on the planet, finds himself surrounded by friends and fun. But putting yourself out there is only the first part. What with yourself after that is just as important. The next thing Dexter understands is that people generally like being around people who make their lives easier. That sounds obvious, but a lot of lonely people miss it. They spend so much time worrying about whether they're interesting or worthy enough to have friends that they forget how valuable it is to simply be pleasant. Dexter is never the loudest person in the room. He's definitely not the most charismatic. He rarely dominates conversations, and he doesn't constantly demand attention. Instead, he just becomes someone who is easy to be around for most people. The perfect example is the donuts. It's such a small thing that most people barely think about it. Yet, every morning, Dexter walks into Miami Metro carrying donuts. Every morning he makes the office slightly better. People smile when they see him. People associate him with something positive. Over time, those small interactions create something meaningful. Nobody becomes popular because of a single grand gesture. Most relationships are built through hundreds of tiny positive interactions repeated consistently over time. The same pattern shows up everywhere in Dexter's life. Before he's even married to Rita, he's helping with Aster and Cody. He's spending time with them, looking after them, being reliable, being present. He isn't trying to force his way into their lives. He's earning trust through his consistency and usefulness. Whether it's pizza nights, school events, or getting her abusive ex-husband locked up by framing him as a relapsed heroin addict, Dexter earned Rita's love by being there when she and the kids needed him. That's how strong relationships are usually built. Not through dramatic declarations, but through repeated demonstrations that you can be counted on. One of the things about Dexter that showed other people that he's reliable is how often he shows up for people when they're struggling. Whenever someone he cares about ends up in the hospital, for example, Dexter is there. When Deb is injured in the line of duty, he's there. When she was shot alongside Lundy by Christine Hill, he was there. When Hannah poisons Deb, he's there. When the brain surgeon puts Deb in the hospital, he's there again. Every single time. No matter what else is happening in his life, he makes time for the people who matter to him. The same thing happens with Camilla Fig. When her lung cancer becomes terminal, Dexter doesn't just fade away because the situation is uncomfortable. He stays and listens. He supports her and visits the hospital multiple times. Ultimately, he even grants her request for a death by pie mercy killing because he can't stand watching her suffer. And look at Brother Sam after Nick shoots him. Again, Dexter shows up. Again, Dexter stays involved. Again, Dexter supports a friend when they're at their lowest. That stuff sticks with people and makes them want to be there for him in return when they can, meaning that when he is down and out, he won't have to suffer alone. And Dexter suffers a lot. That's what's especially impressive. Dexter accomplishes all of this despite carrying more personal problems than almost anyone around him. His life is full of stress, secrets, guilt, and complications. He's always figuring out some freshly fucked up news about his already traumatic upbringing. He had to kill his own brother. His wife was murdered by a serial killer with his son in the room, for Pete's sake. Yet he doesn't make every interaction about himself. He doesn't constantly unload his trauma onto everyone he meets. Instead, he focuses on what he can contribute, what he can offer them. While he's busy struggling to remember where he left a body he needs to dispose of, he stops what he's doing to get his son's medicine. When he's in the middle of his own emotional crises, he takes time out to listen to Deb's problems. When Batista gets kicked out of his house by his wife, Dexter brings him to his place to crash for the night. That's one of the reasons people trust him. Supporting other people creates goodwill, and that tends to come back around. The people who consistently help others usually discover that others are willing to help them in return. Dexter spends years building that goodwill. So when he needs support, many of the people around him are willing to give it because they've experienced firsthand that Dexter has always been there for them. But not all relationships are so transactional. Some bonds are unconditional, and they need the most attention of all. Family is another area where Dexter quietly provides a surprisingly good example. He shows that if you're lucky enough to have family members who genuinely care about you, you need to stay close to them. Dexter certainly tries to. His relationship with Deb is one of the strongest connections in his entire life. No matter how much he insists he doesn't understand emotions, the things he is willing to do for Deb say otherwise. When Deb is shot by Christine Hill, Dexter immediately becomes consumed with finding the person responsible. At first he believes Trinity is behind it, and his reaction says everything about how much Deb means to him. Even before that, he's constantly looking out for her. When Christine pushes Deb into interviews she clearly doesn't want, Dexter shields her from unnecessary pressure. He pays attention to what she needs and steps in when he thinks she needs help. When Hannah poisons Deb, Dexter doesn't care that he is in love. He puts his feelings for Hannah aside and gets her arrested, all just to protect his sister. Perhaps the clearest example comes with Brian Moser. Dexter is faced with a choice between his estranged biological brother and the sister who was raised with him. They may have been separated, but Brian represents the person who understands him most completely. Brian shares his blood, his history, and many of his darkest impulses. Deb represents something entirely different. She represents family that was built through years of shared experiences and mutual care and consideration. Dexter chooses Deb. That decision tells you everything about where his priorities truly lie. Deb is his family, and no matter what, Dexter is going to be there for her if he can help it. The same thing happens again and again throughout the series. He saves Deb from Brian. He saves her from El Sapo in season 8. No, whenever her life is threatened, Dexter acts. His relationship with Harrison follows a similar pattern. Dexter isn't a perfect father. He struggles constantly. He makes mistakes. He often doesn't know what the right thing to do is, but he cares deeply. Now that he has Harrison back in his life, he would do almost anything to be a good father to him. He wants Harrison to have something better than what he had. What makes all of this meaningful is that Dexter doesn't always succeed. He can't save every member of his family. From Harry to Rita, their deaths stay with him forever. But while those people are in his life, he tries. He considers them. He protects them. He shows up for them. Loneliness often results from people taking their relationships for granted until they're actually gone. Dexter reminds us that the people we care about deserve effort while they're still here. By showing up for his family, even in his very flawed way, Dexter made sure he was never really alone. With Harrison back on his side, that's basically a guarantee now. Friends are important, but family is paramount. If you don't want to be lonely, that's something you can't afford to forget. Another lesson worth learning from Dexter is that he never stops evolving. One of the easiest ways to stay lonely is to become attached to a fixed idea of who you are. People say things like, "I'm just awkward," or "I'm just bad with people," and treat those statements like permanent facts. Dexter could have done that. He had more reasons than most. Instead, he lets himself learn and grow. It's not the most natural thing for him, but he laughs at Masuka's jokes. Sometimes they're genuinely funny, but Dexter does it because he learned that that's what friends do. He listens when Deb talks about her problems, something else he had to step out of his comfort zone to learn how to do effectively. When Rita and the kids become part of his life, he actively tries to figure out how to be better for them. He pays attention to how people communicate. He studies relationships not to manipulate people intentionally, but because he genuinely wants to understand them. Understanding the people around him is what enables Dexter to grow into someone they need, and in turn, someone he truly wants to be. And after everything is said and done and it's time to leave Miami, Dexter evolves into a completely new person, almost literally. From his name to his hobbies, Dexter abandons everything about himself to become something new. That new version of himself isn't a deadbeat dad with a recently deceased sister and a powerful dark passenger that he can't seem to escape. He's not Dexter Morgan, he's Jim Lindsay, the helpful shopkeep at the local bait and tackle who likes to hunt deer and dance with his girlfriend after work. By allowing himself to evolve, Dexter opened himself up to all sorts of new relationships, and everyone in town seems to love him. They greet him when they see him and include him in discussions about town gossip. None of that would have been possible if he hadn't shed his old skin and stepped into something new. Loneliness can trap those who refuse to embrace change. Dexter doesn't let that happen to him. He keeps moving forward and growing no matter what life throws at him. It may not happen all of the time, but sometimes new opportunities for connection do find you organically. Whenever he feels a genuine connection with someone, he usually allows it to develop. He may first feel the instinct to run away from it, thanks to Harry, but eventually he lets people in. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But by leaning into it, Dexter creates opportunities for him to not be perpetually alone. Lila enters his life because she seems to understand him. Eventually her instability forces him to cut ties, but before he realizes that, he lets himself explore what having someone like Lila in his life would be like. Of course, she brought him nothing but chaos, but if he hadn't given it a try, his Dokes problem would have been a lot more complicated. And before she showed her true colors, she actually did help him process a few things he had been dealing with emotionally. Miguel Prado is another person who Dexter could have iced out, and he almost did. But instead, he gave in to Miguel's offer of friendship, and even though it didn't work out, he was able to avoid loneliness and share some real bonding moments with someone who was almost like him. Lumen becomes one of the few people who truly sees Dexter for who he is. He was reluctant at first, but helping her helped him process his grief over Rita and imagine a life after the one Trinity destroyed. Lumen helped him with Aster, helped him feed his dark passenger, and accepted him as he came. That's important for someone like Dexter. They were all but in love before she eventually left to finally be able to return to a normal life, and he wouldn't have experienced any of it if he fought that connection off. Brother Sam gives Dexter a completely different perspective on forgiveness and redemption before his death. Cuts that relationship short. Hannah becomes someone Dexter genuinely loves, someone who teaches him to accept himself, but his presence ultimately creates too much danger for her. Angela offers him a chance at a relatively normal life until she discovers the truth about him. The important thing isn't that these relationships ended. The important thing is that Dexter allowed them to happen in the first place. A lot of lonely people protect themselves by refusing to become attached at all. They avoid disappointment by avoiding connection altogether. Dexter repeatedly takes the opposite approach. He lets people matter to him even when there's a risk of being hurt later. And that leads to what is probably one of the most important lessons in living loneliness. That willingness to remain open becomes especially impressive when you look at how much loss he experiences. Rita's death alone would have been enough to make most people give up on relationships entirely. She wasn't just someone Dexter dated. She represented stability, family, and a future he never thought he could have. Losing her in such a horrific way could have convinced him that opening up was a mistake, especially since he blames himself for her death, but instead, he keeps going. That's what leads him to form connections with Lumen and later fall in love with Hannah. Insane circumstances force them apart, but he remains open enough to build another relationship with Angela years later. And the same thing happens with his friendships. After Miguel Prado betrays him, Dexter could have easily decided that trusting people wasn't worth the risk. Instead, he forms a meaningful meaningful attachment to brother Sam, and later, a brief bond with Isaac Serco. And through all those failed friendships, he still holds on to the buddies he made at work. That's an incredibly important lesson because loneliness often feeds on disappointment. One failed friendship becomes evidence that friendship isn't worth pursuing. One failed relationship becomes evidence that love just isn't in the cards for you. Dexter experiences more disappointment than most people ever will, yet he never completely closes himself off. Every time something falls apart, he eventually finds the courage to try again. And with that kind of mentality, loneliness will always be temporary. But in order to build up that level of determination, Dexter had to decide for himself what he wanted and who wanted to be. That may be the most important lesson out of all of this. Dexter never fully allows other people to define what he is. Harry spends years telling him that meaningful connection is impossible. Harry genuinely believes Dexter will never be able to get close to other people. If Dexter had accepted that prediction completely, his entire life would have been different. There would have been no Rita, no Aster and Cody, no Harrison, no deep relationship with Deb, no Hannah, no Angela, nothing.